are the warriors?
It's funny you should ask, because the
There
thing...
must be some word.
Well, there is in fact a word, but
I want them all.
Okay, well,
I want all the warriors.
Alright, we better start. It's easy to romanticize New York of the 1970s. Some 40 years later, we're still experiencing the seismic shocks of that decade. Whether you're a fan of hip-hop, or punk, or performance art, nightlife, film production, photography, or modern art. But the factors that stoked that crucible of culture, and the living conditions from which they sprang, were far from the idealized notions of bohemian glamour. Economic downturn, white flight, and the collapse of infrastructure and oversight turned the once great city of New York into a landscape of urban decay and lawlessness. Filling this vacuum of fear, depression, and helplessness was a new breed of street gang. Proliferating in nearly every neighborhood, they offered brotherhood, protection, and pride. Their diversity and multitude stood in stark contrast to the image Hollywood had been portraying of juvenile delinquents for the previous 2 decades. It was that image, the rebellious, misunderstood youth, that in 1965 led a welfare worker and social investigator named Saul Urich to pen his first novel, The Warriors. It portrayed youth gangs as he saw them to be, vicious, callow, and devoid of the rose-tinted sheen that had been depicted in the likes of West Side Story. As a skeleton for its plot, Urich chose the Anabasis, a tome written in 370 BC by Greek soldier, scholar, and historian Xenophon. It tells the tale of an expeditionary force of 10,000 Greek soldiers stranded behind enemy lines who have to march and battle hostile forces on all sides until they reach safety on the shores of the Black Sea. The novel caught the attention of former American International Pictures executive Lawrence Gordon, who would later produce films like Field of Dreams, Hellboy, Watchmen, and Waterworld. Can't win them all. He tried unsuccessfully to get The Warriors made for nearly a decade, until he handed the project over to a frequent collaborator, Walter Hill. By the time The Warriors went into production, Walter Hill had already amassed an impressive amount of credits as a screenwriter, having penned Hickey and Boggs, Sam Peckinpah's The Getaway, The Drowning Pool, and a television series titled Dog and Cat that would have more than a little influence on Shane Black's screenplay for Lethal Weapon. He had also written and directed, with Lawrence Gordon acting as producer, the excellent 1-2 punch of Hard Times, starring Charles Bronson, and The Driver, starring Ryan O'Neal. He would later prove to be a giant in the arena of action, with films like The Long Riders, 48 Hours, Streets of Fire, and Wild Bill. More recently, he directed the acclaimed pilot for Deadwood, for which he received both a DGA award and an Emmy. A history major in college, Hill was well acquainted with the Anabasis and tailored his adaptation more closely than Urich's novel. As such, the film chronicles one night in the life of 9 members of the Warriors, as they are summoned to an all-city summit being held in the Bronx by the Gramercy Riffs, New York's largest and most feared gang. More specifically, they are there to hear a proposal by the Riffs' charismatic leader, Cyrus. Every gang in the city has come, under a general truce, to entertain Cyrus's plans of a permanent alliance, thus making one organization, with numbers far exceeding those of law enforcement.
Can you dig it? Can you dig it? Can you dig it?
Dig it they can. Although not everyone is as enthusiastic, a rogue gang, named appropriately the Rogues, headed by their unhinged, unpredictable leader Luther, have their own plans for Cyrus. In the ensuing confusion, made even more so by the sudden appearance of New York City police, Luther manages to lay blame for Cyrus's assassination on the Warriors. What follows is a hellacious trek, much like the Greek forces of old, through unfamiliar territory while being beset on all sides by hostile forces. This would be a daunting challenge on its own, but thanks to the help of a DJ in the Riff's employ, word is now out that the Warriors are a prized target.
It's a special for the Warriors. That's that real live bunch from Coney.
While the main antagonists remain the Rogues, Hill populates the film with dozens of equally ferocious, outlandish, and sometimes ridiculous gangs. As ludicrous as the hi-hats appear, check out the Gladiators, dutifully paying for their subway ride. Lame. When the train that should represent a quick trip back to Coney Island is sabotaged, the Warriors must set off on foot through the lonely, eerie, and virtually post-apocalyptic streets of New York, which are beautifully shot by cinematographer Andrew Laszlo, who manages to make the nighttime hellscape at times truly breathtaking. They're menaced at every turn by gangs like the Turnbull ACs, who are terrifying, and the Orphans, who are not. Their interaction with the Orphans is significant for 2 reasons. It introduces us to Mercy, played by Deborah Van Valkenburg, and it demonstrates a significant and meaningful departure from the novel. The Orphans will allow the Warriors to pass through their turf unmolested if they remove their vests and go as civilians. They do so happily in the book. In the film, not so much. While Hill has imbued the Warriors with a more archetypal form of heroism, he never delves too deeply into whom these characters are as individuals. But that just may be the point. For whatever benefit or skill each of them represents, they're only as strong as the sum of their parts. When they become separated, thanks to a run-in with the police, themselves portrayed as just another gang, though with more professional attire, things go very bad, very quickly. Half of the gang become waylaid and nearly slaughtered by the Lizzies, an all-female gang, and the other half face potential annihilation at the hands, or bats, of perhaps the film's most frightening antagonists, the Baseball Furies. This leads to one of the film's most memorable battles, and definitely one of its best lines of dialogue.
I'll shove that bat up your ass and turn you into a popsicle.
And while Hill may seem to revel in the balletic, stylized violence the Warriors are forced to engage in, it never seems gratuitous or without consequence. In fact, while an argument may be made against lionizing a group of potentially unscrupulous anti-heroes, the film is never anything less than moral. This is best exemplified by a scene of pure instant karma, where Ajax abandons his brothers so he can force himself on, unbeknownst to him, an undercover police officer. That undercover cop, incidentally, is future Academy Award winner Mercedes Ruehl. She's just one of many future stars in the Warriors cast. Her would-be attacker Ajax is played by James Remar, whose smoldering intensity would serve him well in a lifetime of villainous roles, though most will recognize him as the saintly Harry Morgan from Dexter. Lynn Thigpen as the DJ would later guide an entire generation in their quest to find Carmen Sandiego. In the same year that The Warriors was released, Dorsey Wright, who played their leader Cleon, also turned in a fantastic performance as Lafayette in Milos Forman's adaptation of Hair. Thomas Waits as Fox went on to battle the Thing for John Carpenter, and interestingly does not have a credit in this film. Clashes with director Hill over script changes led to his termination halfway through filming, and Fox's untimely death. But more than anyone, The Warriors is probably best remembered for Luther, played with manic glee by David Patrick Kelly. It was his idea to have Luther taunt the Warriors with this rhythmic chant. Few actors can invest purely villainous roles with the pathos that Mr. Kelly seems to do so effortlessly. Though in Luther's case, there's no humanity to speak of.
Why'd you waste Cyrus?
No reason. I just like doing things like that.
I'd be remiss if I didn't single out Miss Van Valkenburg. Her performance as Mercy, at turns brazen and desperate, may be the best in the film. Her subtle reaction to a group of well-to-do partygoers' assessment of her haggard appearance is nothing short of heartbreaking, and her delivery of Mercy's justification for living the life she does should be a recognizable wake-up call to everyone in the film.
I see what's happening next door and down the block. Belly hanging down, 5 kids, cockroaches in the cupboard. I'll tell you what I want. I want something now. This is the life I got left. You know what I mean?
We do. We really do. Released on February 9, 1978, The Warriors caused quite a stir, though not entirely for the right reasons. Incidents of vandalism and violence marred screenings on each coast, and in Boston and Los Angeles, at least 3 murders occurred. Paramount pulled advertising, like this poster, which evidently frightened potential moviegoers with the threat that gangs could overwhelm the police. But thanks to strong box office and a smattering of glowing reviews, like one from Pauline Kael, The Warriors would go on to gross more than $12 million, nearly 3 times its budget. And in the intervening years, its effect on pop culture can be felt far and wide, from artists as diverse as Twisted Sister,
Twisted Sister, come out and play.
and Pop Elite itself. There have been comic books, and action figures, and parodies. This one is from a recent episode of Black Dynamite. And in 2005, Rockstar Games, the developers of the Grand Theft Auto series, reunited the cast to give voice to their digital counterparts in a video game adaptation. But no matter the far-flung effects the film has had on pop culture or fandom, the simple fact of the matter is that it remains one of the best action films of the 20th century, painting a vision of old-world American myth on a modern urban landscape. An exhilarating thrill ride that never allows its stabs at social commentary to distract from a tale well told. If you haven't seen it, I envy you. And if you have, then maybe it's time to head back to Coney and spend some time getting reacquainted with the Warriors.
We can do some looking too. Ought to make you feel better.
Hey, what about the money you owe?
For what?